Hello and welcome back to the Advanced English Podcast. I'm your host Hayley, and if you're looking to push your English past that intermediate plateau into more fluent, natural sounding territory, you are in the right place. But before we jump in today, just a quick reminder that you can grab the full transcript for this episode along with the vocabulary list right down in the descriptions, completely free. And if you really want to put this language into practice, do check out my brand new grammar and vocabulary platform. The link's below too. It's packed with interactive exercises, quizzes, and extra materials to help you really retain what you learn here. Right then, let's get into today's topic, which is personality. So the human character, it's quite a fascinating thing, isn't it? On the surface, someone might seem like a quiet, reserved sort of person, bit of a cold fish perhaps. But deep down, once you get to know them, they can turn out to be a complete live wire. Or maybe you've got that colleague who seems like the salt of the earth, but the second things go wrong, they turn out to be as tough as old boots or completely obstinate. So in this episode, we're going to look at how we describe the people around us. We'll be breaking down popular personality models like the Myers-Briggs types and the Big Five. We're going to explore workplace archetypes, look at why some of us are creatures of habit while others are completely impetuous, and even touching on the darker side of human nature as well. And along the way, I'll be dropping in tons of high-level adjectives, phrasal verbs, everyday idioms that native speakers actually use when talking about who people are. So grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's get started. Now, to kick off our exploration, let's talk about how scientists actually measure who we are. So if you've ever spent a rainy Sunday afternoon taking online personality quizzes, chances are you've come across the Myers-Briggs test. It sorts people into 16 neat personality types, telling you whether you're an introverted thinker or an extroverted idealist. It's very popular, especially for team building workshops and social media bios. But here's something that might surprise you. Academic psychologists rarely use it. So why is that? Well, for one thing, the test was created back in the 1940s by a mother and a daughter who had no formal psychological background. But more importantly, it focuses us into rigid binary categories. So you're pushed to be either a total extrovert or a complete introvert. However, human behavior is not really that black and white, is it? Someone who appears to be diffident and quiet around a group of strangers might transform into a total live wire when they're surrounded by close friends. That is why modern researchers prefer the Big Five framework, often remembered using the acronym OCEAN. So this model measures 5 broad dimensions: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So instead of trapping you in a box, the Big Five views personality as like a set of sliding scales. Take conscientiousness, for example. A genuinely conscientious person is thorough, dependable, and takes their responsibilities very seriously. On the flip side, someone low in conscientiousness might be far more impetuous. They act on impulse without giving much thought to consequences. Then you've got neuroticism, which looks at emotional reactivity. So a person who's low in neuroticism comes across as very well balanced and stable, but someone high in neuroticism might feel easily overwhelmed and become self-conscious, or even a bit quick-tempered when things don't go according to plan. And what's fascinating is that while these traits remain fairly steady over time, they're not completely fixed. So some studies show that as we get older, most people naturally become more agreeable and conscientious, a shift known as personality maturation. So if you were a bit obstinate or a bit pig-headed in your early 20s, you will probably find yourself softening up a bit as the years roll on. And what about you? Have you ever taken the Big Five assessment or the MBTI? Do you feel like they got your profile spot on, or did it leave you feeling like, you're not really sure about your personality? Scroll down and leave a little comment. I read every single one. I'd like to know whereabouts you fall on the spectrum. For me, I did actually take a personality test. I'll put the link to that in the description. It's free, by the way, if you're interested in taking one. The result tagged me as a defender, and I have an ISFJT personality type, usually known for being warm, reliable, structured, and deeply supported of people around them, which is quite nice. So what makes my results really interesting is kind of how balanced my scores actually were. So instead of fitting neatly into a very rigid box, my trait breakdown actually shows quite a bit of like flexibility. So I've got 53% extroversion. So I land right down the middle there. I enjoy my quiet focus, but I'm also just as comfortable engaging in conversation with people and building relationships and jumping into collaborations, etc. 54% intuitive. So while defender types tend to stick strictly to concrete details, my results slightly lean towards intuition, which means I also like reading between the lines, connecting the dots, and keeping an eye on the bigger picture. For feelings, I get 64%. This is one of my clearer traits. When making decisions, human impact matters to me, and I naturally consider how choices affect other people, and I aim for empathy, fairness, and group harmony. I think this is absolutely spot on for me, I would say. Judging, I'm at 58%, so I definitely appreciate a solid plan and having a clear structure. I stay on track with my timelines, and I like a kind of clean sense of organisation. It helps me be productive and reliable. And lastly, assertiveness. This was 54%. So even though my defender status was labelled with a T on the end, which means turbulence, I actually lean more towards assertiveness. So I generally stay grounded under pressure, trust my own judgment, and I don't easily let small setbacks throw me off course. I'd say quite a bit of this is true. This personality test also gives you kind of strengths and weaknesses. So it's given me strengths according to work. I'm calm under pressure. I'm reliable. I give practical help. I'm very collaborative. Weaknesses, I downplay my achievements. I would definitely say yes to that. It also says I'm reluctant to innovate, which is the exact opposite of what I do. I'm constantly trying to find new things, so that's not true. Have difficulty saying no, apparently, yes. I've worked on this quite a bit in the last few years, actually. I used to have a lot of difficulty saying no, which would then cause me to overburden myself, which is another weakness. I think I still definitely do that anyway, but not from saying no, just from trying out too many new things at once, I think. What else we got here? In terms of personal growth, I have disciplined habits. I wouldn't say that. I feel like I pick up new habits or hobbies quite a lot, and then I just kind of get bored after a month and leave. I'm a mindful listener. Yes, I would say that's true. I hold myself back. No, I wouldn't say that. So it's a bit hit and miss, you know, these personality types. They can be right on the money, but other times, yeah, they might not be exactly right for you. Anyway, let's look at how these personality traits show up in the place where most of us spend a decent amount of our weekly lives, is at work. So if you've ever worked in an office or you generally work in a team, you know how job environments have a kind of unique way of throwing together people you would never normally choose to hang out with, right? So you probably worked with a colleague who's a genuine, man or woman of their word. So when they promise to send a file over by 9 a.m, it lands in your inbox at 8:45 without fail. They just get on with their tasks, they don't fuss, they don't cause any drama. And then you also had people who are just the salt of the earth. They'll gladly stay late on a Friday evening to help you clear up whatever mess you've made. They never ask for a big thank you or expect a promotion in return. But the trouble starts when you have to deal with someone who's a bit aggressive or self-centered. So take that co-worker who's terribly pushy. They're constantly demanding the best assignments. They talk over people during weekly meetings. They're selfish in promoting their own position. If you get particularly unlucky, you might end up working for a manager who insists on keeping the whole department strictly under their thumb, just micromanaging everything. That gets exhausting pretty quickly because you just feel like you're being watched all day, basically. And then you might get a new hire as well. You know, when they join the team, they might seem like a bit of an unknown quantity at first. You know, you sit there in the morning meeting, looking at them, wondering how they're going to fit into the dynamic. Maybe they'll turn out to be a bit of a bright spark who brings clever ideas for fixing old problems that have annoyed the team for years. Or perhaps they'll just sit in the corner looking completely unapproachable and cold. It's remarkably easy to misjudge people early on in employment. A new colleague, again, they might come across as a bit of a cold fish during the first couple of weeks in the office. They barely say hello to you in the staff room. You might even assume they're a bit aloof or haughty, thinking they're better than everyone else. But what you see on the surface is rarely the whole story. More often than not, that person's probably just feeling self-conscious about being in a new environment with unfamiliar faces. They're trying to play it cool while they work out who everyone is and how the team operates and where the unwritten rules are. And deep down, they might just be desperate to connect, but their natural reserve holds them back. And once you realise that that quiet colleague isn't being rude, your whole approach changes. So you stop taking their silence personally, and you might give them the time and space they need to settle in. Leaving the work environment behind, it is worth asking whether these scientific assessments are the only way we try to make sense of each other. Now, long before modern psychology started sorting us into 4-letter codes or sliding scales, people were turning to much older alternative methods to explain why we act the way we do. Depending on where you grew up in the world, the first question someone asks to figure out your true character might not be about your job at all, but rather the date of your birth or even what's running through your veins. So let's take astrology first. So in the UK, you might think most people view horoscopes as a bit of harmless fun, but the numbers tell a different story. So a 2022 survey conducted by YouGov revealed that about 27% of British adults actually believe in astrology. And that figure jumps significantly when you look at younger generations. So if you talk to someone who's mad keen on astrology, they'll happily explain your working habits or relationship troubles using your star sign. They might tell you that your tendency to be a creature of habit comes down to you being a Taurus. Or if you get a bit wild on a Friday night spending money you've not got, they'll blame it on you being a Leo. For many believers, it offers a quick way to categorize people without needing a formal psychological test. You meet someone at a party who seems a bit diffident at first, standing by the drinks table, not really saying much. An astrology enthusiast will immediately check their birth date to see if they're a typical shy Pisces. Feels personal, gives people a framework to bond over, even if scientists dismiss it as nothing more than confirmation bias. Now, if we head over to East Asia, you find a completely different system that has nothing to do with space or constellations. In Japan and South Korea, people often look at your blood type to predict how you will behave. This concept, known as Ketsue Kigata, gained traction back in 1927 when a Japanese professor named Takeji Furukawa published a paper proposing a link between temperament and blood groups. And this idea caught on massively in popular culture to the extent that in 2008, a Gallup survey in South Korea found that 75% of adults believe blood type directly influence personality traits. So in this system, blood type A individuals are seen as meticulous and earnest, though perhaps a little bit obstinate when pushed to change their ways. Type B people are considered the complete opposite. They're described as independent and sometimes impulsive, acting on a whim rather than following established guidelines. Then you've got type AB, which make up a tiny fraction of the population. People with type AB blood are often viewed as a total unknown quantity. They might seem sensible on the surface, but then turn surprisingly excitable when a topic they care about comes up. And finally, type O individuals are usually described as outgoing live wires. They're supposed to be natural leaders who stay well balanced under pressure and get along with anyone. So the interesting thing about all these alternative systems is how persistent they are despite the total lack of scientific evidence. Psychologists have tested blood type theories repeatedly over decades, finding zero statistical correlation between blood groups and psychological profiles. Yet, Job applications in Japan have historically asked for blood types, and dating apps in South Korea regularly use them as search filters. So, why do these ideas refuse to die out? Part of the answer lies in human nature. We dislike uncertainty and we hate feeling like the people around us are completely unpredictable. Whether it's an online star sign chart or a blood test result, these models give us a sense of control and they offer a shortcut for understanding our friends, even if deep down we don't know we're being a bit gullible for believing them. Speaking of star signs, I happen to be a Libra myself, which is famously represented by the scales. And if you look at my test results, the personality test that I did, there is actually quite a big overlap there. So Libras are traditionally described as peacemakers who value harmony, diplomacy, and fairness above all else. That aligns pretty seamlessly with my 64% feeling score and my drive to consider how choices affect the people around me. On top of that, having several trait scores hovering around the 50% mark, which seems to show that I am a true Libra in practice. I do like balanced things. Constantly balancing between quiet focus and social energy, or between practical details and big picture thinking, rather than tipping heavily towards one extreme. Having said that, I don't actually believe in astrology at all, so perhaps it's just a happy coincidence. What about you, though? Let me know. Do you believe in astrology? Let me know in the comments what your star sign is and what it says about you. Moving on to another topic that always gets people talking. Let's look at whether men and women actually have different personalities or if it's all down to cultural conditioning. So you've probably heard lots of sweeping generalizations on social media. People claim that men have a quick temper or that women are naturally more empathetic. But what happens when psychologists actually analyze the data? So back in 2001, there was a landmark study led by Dr. Paul Costa, and this analysed personality test data from over 23,000 men and women across 56 different countries. And the findings showed consistent patterns across almost every culture studied, though the differences were far smaller than popular stereotypes suggest. So the biggest gap shows up in agreeableness. So on average, women score consistently higher in this area than men across nearly every region in the world. In daily terms, women are statistically more likely to be considerate and cooperative, and they're also far less likely to act like a cold fish towards other people. Men score lower on average, which can sometimes translate into being more competitive or a bit pig-headed during disagreements. Another area where there was a clear statistical divide is neuroticism, which measures how people experience negative feelings like anxiety. So women scored moderately higher on average, often reporting that they feel self-conscious or easily overwhelmed when plans go wrong. Men tend to report lower levels on these surveys, though researchers point out an important caveat here. From a young age, boys are often conditioned to play it cool and act tough, even when they're secretly struggling beneath the surface, because admitting to feeling anxious is a sign of weakness in many cultures. Men might simply be less willing to admit these feelings on a written questionnaire. Now, when it comes to extroversion, the overall total scores between men and women are nearly identical, but the specific breakdown looks a bit different. So men score higher in thrill-seeking, making them more likely to be impetuous or act on impulse without weighing up the risks. Women tend to score higher on warmth, coming across as approachable and eager to build social connections. And now here's the real head scratcher that surprised the researchers. You might expect that in countries with high levels of gender equality, where men and women have equal access to education and work, that personality differences would shrink or disappear entirely. But back in 2008, a major international study led by Professor David Schmidt proved the exact opposite. So in progressive Scandinavian nations like Sweden and Norway, the personality gap between men and women is actually significantly wider than it is in traditional or developing societies. And social scientists call this the gender equality paradox. So when a country removes economic pressures, and rigid traditional roles, people are no longer forced to conform to a specific social mold to survive. And as a result, men and women have the freedom to follow their natural inclinations, which actually amplifies these subtle differences rather than erasing them. So while population level statistics show clear trends, they never tell the whole story about an individual person. You will easily meet plenty of men who are deeply modest and soft-hearted, just as you will meet women who are completely fearless and stubbornly obstinate. Now, while having a distinct personality makes us unique, there is a point where certain traits can cross the line from being helpful to causing genuine distress. Now, in psychology, personality traits exist along a spectrum, but when an extreme trait starts interfering with your ability to hold down a job or maintain healthy relationships, it can slide into clinical territory. Take conscientiousness, for example. In moderate amounts, being conscientious is fantastic. It makes you reliable, you're organized, you're thorough. But when someone pushes that trait to the extreme, it can turn into rigid perfectionism. So a person like this might spend hours obsessing over tiny errors in a document. They might be unable to delegate tasks because they simply do not trust anyone else to do the job properly. And in clinical settings, researchers have found strong links between extreme conscientiousness and conditions like obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Now consider what happens when someone's extremely high in neuroticism. People who score at the far end of the scale often find themselves constantly on edge, worrying about things that might never even happen. And they tend to be highly excitable in response to minor setbacks and often take every piece of critical feedback personally. According to data from the World Health Organization, high neuroticism is one of the strongest psychological predictors for developing major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety. When you spend every day feeling self-conscious and expecting the worst, the mental toll is enormous. So personality traits can also cause trouble when they leave you vulnerable to be exploited by others. So if your agreeableness score is exceptionally high, you might turn into what British people call a soft touch. You end up saying yes to everything, lending money to unreliable friends, taking on extra workloads just because you can't bear the thought of letting anyone down. And inexperienced or naive individuals often fall into this trap. Because they're somewhat gullible, they assume everyone else operates with the same good intentions. And then over time, being a soft touch leads straight to physical exhaustion and resentment. At the opposite extreme, you have people who score dangerously low on agreeableness and conscientiousness. And when someone lacks empathy and struggles with impulse control and exhibits a total disregard for social rules, psychologists start looking at cluster B personality disorders such as antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy. And in clinical literature, around 1 or 2% of the general population meets the criteria for these conditions. So in casual conversation, people might describe someone like this as just a nasty piece of work or a psychopath. But in psychiatry terms, it represents a profound inability to form a genuine human connection. So even traits that seem harmless on the surface can cause long-term strain. Someone who is extremely restless might struggle to stay in a job for more than 6 months because they're constantly chasing novelty, because routine makes them feel trapped. Or consider a manager who does not suffer fools gladly, has a quick temper. You know, their sharp standards might get quick results in the short term, but then their constant outbursts end up driving away talented employees and just ruining team morale. So while our traits shape who we are, balance is everything. When a particular characteristic becomes too dominant, it stops being a personality quirk and it starts becoming a genuine hurdle to living a healthy life. Now let's turn to a big question that scientists and philosophers have debated for centuries. Can you actually change who you are at your core? Or are you pretty much stuck with the personality you were born with? If you ask the average person on the street, you might get some mixed answers. What do you think, actually? Let me know in the comments. What do you think? Can you change your personality? Some people believe that an obstinate teenager who refuses to listen to advice will inevitably grow into a pig-headed adult who never backs down during an argument. Others argue that life experience completely reshapes us over time, turning us from a live wire into a calm, steady individual. And for a long time, the dominant view in academic psychology was that personality gets set in stone in adulthood. So the pioneering American psychologist William James famously wrote in 1890 that by age 30, personality has set like plaster and will never soften again. However, modern research paints a much more flexible picture. So the strongest evidence comes from long-term tracking studies, such as the famous Dunedin Multidisciplinary Health and Developmental Study in New Zealand, which has followed over 1,000 individuals from birth right into their 50s. And what researchers like Professor Brent Roberts from the University of Illinois have consistently found is a pattern called the personality maturation effect. I mentioned this a bit earlier in the podcast, but we'll take a more detailed look now. So as people move through their 20s, 30s, and even 90s, most individuals naturally become more conscientious, more agreeable, and emotionally stable. So if you were a bit quick-tempered in your early years, taking on responsibilities like a full-time mortgage and a job and raising children forces you to develop better self-control. And you gradually learn to rein in impulsive behavior because life obligations demand it. That means someone who was a bit of a nightmare in their youth might steadily settle down and turn into a well-balanced individual by the time they reach middle age. Their neuroticism scores drop, meaning they stop becoming mad over minor inconveniences and stop feeling quite so self-conscious around strangers. However, while natural maturation shifts our scores slightly over time, can someone make a drastic, deliberate change to their baseline traits? Say you're an extreme introvert who comes across as a bit aloof, but your dream career requires you to be an effusive, outgoing presenter. Can you force yourself to flip that switch permanently? So research shows that intentional trait change is actually possible, but it takes serious effort. So a 2017 review analysing over 200 clinical studies found that targeted psychological interventions produced measurable shifts in personality traits in as little as 6 weeks. And the largest changes were seen in reducing neuroticism and boosting extroversion. That said, changing a deep-rooted habit often feels like you're fighting against gravity. Even if you train yourself to be more outgoing at networking events, your underlying tendencies stay quietly waiting in the background. So if you are naturally a creature of habit who likes doing the exact same thing every day, forcing yourself to be completely unpredictable every weekend will eventually exhaust you. You might play it cool and act like you enjoy the chaos, but deep down, your brain is craving order and predictability. In short, your core temperament acts a bit like an elastic band, so you can stretch it in different directions when situations demand it, but as soon as you stop paying attention, it tends to snap back towards its original shape. You can certainly refine your behaviour, soften your worst habits, and learn valuable social skills, but you will rarely transform into an entirely different human being overnight. Now, let me ask you a question. How do you feel when your alarm goes off at 6 in the morning? Do you spring out of bed, ready to embrace whatever random surprises the day throws at you? Or do you follow a precise, carefully crafted sequence of events before you can even think about stepping out the door? Well, this brings us to our next major topic, which is routines and spontaneity. So some people are creatures of habit. They thrive on structure, predictability, and familiarity. Some people might eat the exact same bowl of porridge at precisely 7:15 every morning for 30 years. If you suggest going to a new cafe or changing the weekend itinerary at the last minute, they look at you as though you've asked them to jump out of an aeroplane. And for a creature of habit, unexpected changes to routine do not feel like exciting opportunities. They just feel like unnecessary chaos. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got people who find routine suffocating. So these are individuals who live for spontaneity. They're naturally impetuous, happy to book a flight on a Thursday evening for a weekend getaway without having any idea where they'll sleep when they land. In a work setting, an impulsive colleague might suddenly drop their current workload to chase a brand new idea that just popped into their head. While that energy can be incredibly creative and it can bring a lot of creativity to a project, it can also drive their more structured teammates absolutely insane. Most of us sit somewhere in the middle. balancing a need for order with a desire for novelty. But what is happening psychologically when some people lean heavily towards one extreme? A lot of it comes back to the big 5 trait of conscientiousness, combined with how our brains process risk. So people who build strict routines often use structure as a tool to manage anxiety. Knowing exactly what is coming next reduces mental fatigue. So when you do not have to waste energy deciding what to wear, what to eat, when to work, your brain can focus on deeper tasks. Spontaneous individuals, however, tend to score high in openness and low in neuroticism. And because they do not worry about things going wrong, they are far more comfortable taking leaps into the unknown. And if a plan falls apart, they play it cool and adapt on the fly and just trust things will sort themselves out in the end. And the clash between these two mindsets is one of the most common sources of friction in relationships and workplaces. Imagine pairing a meticulous planner with a partner who's just a loose cannon. The planner gets anxious because there's no strategy, while the spontaneous partner feels controlled and restricted, complaining that the partner is as stubborn and obstinate as a mule for refusing to try something new. Neither approach is inherently superior, and a team composed of entirely, creatures of habit, it might run like clockwork, but they risk becoming stagnant and missing out on new opportunities. On the other hand, a team made up solely of impulsive live wires will generate brilliant ideas, but they might struggle to finish a single project on time. So the real secret lies in knowing your own tendencies and surrounding yourself with people whose habits balance out your own. And that brings us to the end of today's episode on personality. I do hope you enjoyed it and learnt some new vocabulary. Make sure to download the transcript and vocab list in the description. Having a text in front of you while you listen back a second time is a brilliant way to lock in a lot of the vocabulary from today's episode. And if you want to take your studies further, head on over to my grammar and vocabulary platform using the link in the description. It's full of interactive practice exercises designed specifically to help intermediate and advanced level learners speak with real confidence. And I would love to know what you thought about today's topic. Which personality model do you find most accurate for your own life? Are you a creature of habit who needs a solid plan, or do you prefer to act impulsively and just see where the day takes you? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Reading about your experiences is always a favourite part of making these episodes, and I reply to as many comments as I can. If you found this episode useful, please give it a like, share it with a fellow English learner, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new lesson. And thanks so much for spending your time with me today. Grab yourself another cup of tea, enjoy the rest of your week, and I will catch you in the next episode of the Advanced English Podcast. Bye for now.